Chapter 24 of the Alps, the Danube, and the Near East. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Betty B. The Kings of Greece. Kings are like stars. They rise and set. They have the worship of the world, but no repose. These words of Shelley fit well the kings of Greece, and especially George II, with whom I had a talk while he was a star in the imperial constellation of Europe. Today, by an act of Parliament, confirmed by vote of the people, Greece is a republic, and George has been banished after a brief reign. He is living with his celebrated mother-in-law, Queen Marie of Romania. The star of George II rose on September 27, 1922, when he succeeded to the throne on the forced abdication of his father, Constantino I, who was elected after the assassination of his father, George I. His star is now behind the clouds, but whether it has really set remains for the politicians to decide. In Greece, revolutions spring up like mushrooms, and another turn of fortune's wheel may give him back his throne. Greece was a kingdom for almost 100 years. It won its independence from Turkey about the time Andrew Jackson was serving his first term as President of the United States. The first king was chosen through the guarantee of the three then greatest powers, Great Britain, France, and Russia, and the man selected was Otto, the second son of the King of Batavia. He came to the throne at the age of 18 and reigned for 29 years, before he was expelled by the people. That was when Abraham Lincoln was president and we were in the midst of the Civil War. Then the three powers made another selection and guaranteed the throne to a son of the royal family of Denmark, which had long been breeding kings and queens for Europe. The man chosen was George I, the second son of the King of Denmark, and he reigned over Greece for more than 50 years. He was on the throne when I first visited Athens, and I then had an interview with him in the royal palace, to which I refer farther on in this chapter. I met him again here 20 years later, not long before he was assassinated at Salonika. King George I was succeeded by his son Constantino, who reigned from 1913 to 1917, when he was deposed, and his second son, Alexandros, was chosen. About 3 years later, Alexandros died, and Constantino was taken back, only to be expelled again in 1922. Constantino went to Switzerland, where he soon died, and George II ascended the throne. It was during his brief rule that I talked with him here in Athens. My interviews with King George I took place in the old palace on Constitution Square. It is now occupied by the officials of the Near East Relief, the American organization of which I hear nothing but praise in my travels in this part of the world. My audience with King George II was in a new building erected in the old palace grounds, just in the rear of the former home of the king. It is an unostentatious but beautiful stone structure, surrounded by a great park, although it is right in the heart of the city. Soldiers in the ballet skirts of the ancient Greek uniform stood at the gate and saluted as we went by. Entering, we came into a hall that would not be considered magnificent in any millionaire's house in the States. A servant clad in a modest uniform took our hats and hung them up on a rack near the entrance. We walked alone up the white marble stairs to the main floor and waited in a home-like parlor which had none of the stiffness of the usual waiting rooms of royalty. The palace has perhaps 40 rooms. It is simply furnished, the paintings are modern, and some of the decorations would not be out of place in the country home of a well-to-do American. For instance, I noticed a center table covered with an Indian cotton cloth, such as might be bought for $2 in any department store. The chairs had on summer suits of blue gingham, and the walls were calcimined in light blue. A very ordinary electric chandelier hung from the ceiling. George II is simple in his tastes, and always preferred his country home known as Taitoi, situated about 25 miles from Athens. The palace in the city is the property of the nation, but the estate of Taitoi was bought by King George I, this young man's grandfather, and was run as a farm as well as a royal place of residence. Taitoi has excellent soil, and George I had large vineyards from which he made wine that found a ready market in Athens. The estate is not far from Marathon, where the invading Persians were defeated by the Athenians in 490 B.C. There is a fairly good motor road from there to Athens, over which I understand Alexandros, who was king from 1917 to 1920, could make the trip to his palace here in 25 minutes. King Alexandros was famous as a motorist. While a prince, he was honorary president of the Chauffeurs Union in Paris, and later was wont to drive down University Street in Athens at 50 miles an hour. He was democratic in his tastes and considered the king job a kind of amusement. You may remember that he died of blood poisoning caused by the bite of his pet monkey. But to return to the palace. I had waited but a short time when the High Court Chamberlain, a plainly dressed man, appeared and asked me to come with him. We walked together across the hall and entered the library, where, at a desk, with photographs of his father, mother, and grandfather facing him, sat a young man of 32. It was His Majesty George II, King of Greece. He rose as I entered, the High Court Chamberlain introduced me, and His Majesty gave me a cordial shake of the hand, motioning me to a seat at his side. The presentation was about the same as that one would have to any business man, and the dress of the king struck the same note of simplicity. He wore a business suit of Scotch tweed, and his soft white collar was held tight to a black knit silk four-in-hand tie by a gold pin. I have a pin much like it that cost me $3. His shoes were of tan, and his only jewelry consisted of 2 rings on the fingers of his left hand. One of these was a gold wedding ring. As we talked, I had a good chance to study the king. His appearance was pleasing. I saw a well set up, healthy young man, about 5 feet 8 inches tall. His features were strong, his hair was dark, and his eyes were as blue as the skies over his palace. He was cordial in his greeting and smiled as he talked. He had no mannerisms whatsoever, and he impressed me as being modest and forceful. Our conversation was in English, and His Majesty spoke without reserve. Among the subjects discussed were the difficulties of Greece in looking after the million-odd refugees forced out of Smyrna and other parts of the old Turkish Empire. King George said he wanted to thank the United States for its aid in their care. He said Greece could eventually absorb all its refugees and that their young blood would add much to the strength of the nation. I asked him about farming conditions. He replied that the crops of Greece could be greatly increased by intensive cultivation and more irrigation. The climate and the soil of this country, he said, are much like those of California. He referred to what the navel orange has done for Southern California, saying that the Greeks had recently imported cuttings of that tree and were going to try them out in different parts of the country. In the course of our conversation, I said, "Your Majesty, may I ask a personal question?" "What is that?" he said. "I should like to have Your Majesty tell me frankly how you like your job." A look of disgust came over the face of the young monarch as he replied, "I loathe it, I hate it, I despise it. I would like to be free from it, but how can I help it?" "It would not be hard perhaps to find someone who would change places with you," said I. "Let him come forth and I will give him the chance," said the king. "How about yourself? I will give you my job and take yours, which seems to me much more interesting." It was shortly after this that the king lost his job and departed from Athens almost in tears. When I read the news, I was glad I still held my job. King George married Elizabeth, the eldest daughter of Queen Marie and King Ferdinand of Romania. It was a love match. The two met in Switzerland when he had no hope of ever becoming king. They fell in love. George popped the question, and Elizabeth said yes. Their marriage was simple, and their wedded life now is as domestic and retired as that of our grandmothers and grandfathers in the days of the Puritans. They love each other, and there has never been a breath of scandal connected with either. I don't know how much money George II was able to lay by while he was king, but his grandfather, George I, was rich. Greece gave him $270,000 a year, and in addition, Russia, Great Britain, and France each paid him $20,000 annually. From a royal standpoint, living in Greece was not expensive, and George I, who was an investor and a speculator, should have laid up a fortune in the 50 years of his reign. I met King George I when he was in his prime. He was the most democratic of monarchs, and this seems to have been a characteristic of the whole royal family. King George and Queen Olga, she was, you know, a niece of Alexander II, Emperor of Russia, were fond of strolling about Athens and stopping on the streets to chat with their friends. They liked the Americans, and many of our prominent citizens were entertained at their family table. The king was accustomed to take trips through the country and talk with the farmers. On such occasions he wore no sign of his rank and had no trouble in getting opinions, for every Greek peasant has decided views as to how not only Athens but the whole world should be run. Greece was never a monarchy in the arbitrary or tyrannical sense of the word. Its kings were mere figureheads, and the people have ruled to a great extent. The Greek republics of ancient times were usually cities with a few dozen square miles of territory about them. The vote was limited to the free citizens, and these were so few that they could all be addressed in the open air. The republics of that time had no civil service, and there were no organized political parties. There was more graft than there is now, and to take a bribe was hardly considered disgraceful. Athens was full of demagogues, and most of them were willing to sell their souls for votes. Politics in Greece today are far less corrupt than they used to be. The country is now ruled, as it has been ever since it threw off the yoke of Turkey, by the national parliament, called the Boulé. This consists of but one chamber, to which members are elected by popular vote for the term of 4 years. The constitution also provides for a council of state, which is something like our Senate, though it has much less power. The Boulé has 369 members, divided just now among 5 parties. They get only $800 a year and are fined if they are absent from more than 5 sittings a month. All Greece is divided into departments, each of which is under a governor appointed by the Ministry of Athens and sends representatives to the National Assembly. On election days, each candidate has his own ballot box with his photograph on top, and he can be present and watch the proceedings if he wishes. All citizens whose names are on the voting list are handed as many buckshot as there are places to be filled. The ballot boxes are divided into 2 compartments, a white one labeled yes and a black one marked no. The voter thrusts his arm through a hole in the top so that no one can tell into which compartment he finally drops his shot. Wives of candidates often help their husbands in the campaign, and I have heard of one woman who won the vote of a whole village by distributing free tickets for a trip to Athens. The opening of Parliament is a great social event. The ministers attend in full evening dress, and the dignitaries of the Orthodox Church are present in their black robes and high hats. After the preliminaries are over, the Premier and the Archbishop go to a table in the center of the hall, on which is a gold vessel filled with holy water. The Archbishop holds out a cross, which the Premier kisses. The Archbishop dips an olive sprig in the water and strikes the Premier on the brow with it. The other ministers of state go through the same ceremony. The sessions of the Greek Parliament are often lively affairs, especially in the last few years, when the country has had so many ups and downs with rapid changes of governments and kings. Violent speeches are not uncommon, and sometimes lead to disorder within the chamber itself. They may even result in members meeting outside to fight duels. End of chapter 24.